at times, what I see, at least when it comes to mothers and daughters, is women and mothers trying to relive their lives through their daughters. And so it's difficult for the young girls to find their own selves. And then when they hit probably their late teens, early 20s, they realize that I too am my own person. And then there's a state of rebellion. I've had a lot of conversations with my women friends, and this is something that really comes up, that mothers are holding back a lot out of fear, out of the natural tendency to just be silent. But then they put a lot of work in trying to remold themselves from their daughters, which I think is very harmful, because even though your child comes from you, they are very different individuals who are going to experience and see life very differently. And so it's very important that as much as we are communicating our experiences, and I say we because one day I will be a mother, right? We are communicating our experiences. We are not vomiting out what we wanted life to be for ourselves into them. So that's what I wanted to say about mothers and change.
So as we continue from there, we are going to talk about change as a requirement for growth.
I think it falls really in line with what I was just talking about, where I'll go back to mothers or just a child growing up in a home where it's almost like, at least for African homes or Ghanaian homes or the kind of homes that we grew up in, because I grew up in a very mixed home with Ghanaian, Nigerian parents who lived abroad for a while. There's a lot of, everything is set and laid down for you. They're going to go to this school, they're going to become a nurse, they're going to marry this kind of person, you're going to have to go to church, you don't have to spend too much time outside. It's almost like you're just born to follow, follow, and follow. And so without even trying, we lose ourselves as children. And it makes it harder for us to find ourselves, because when you become an adult, there are certain things, like I said in the beginning, that you are going to experience things and do things that you never have imagined yourself doing. So imagine not knowing yourself enough and then finding yourself in a situation where you're relearning who you are. It's a really difficult state to be in. And so for me, a lot of the writing that I do centers on how family affects children. So you find mother-daughter relationship, father-daughter relationship, father-children relationship, sisters, sister relationship, brothers, or even friends who grew up in the same compound, and how these little experiences go a long way in changing your life or making it go in a certain trajectory that you may not have wanted if you had a say. So I'm going to read a poem that really focuses around that. So this is Room for Me. My mother's kitchen was a hallway redesigned in a home that was temporarily ours. She fit all our kitchenware in there and still managed to make room for movement. This is how I learned to fit myself in small spaces. The fear of having nothing to do with extra space, the fear of shrinking as things got bigger. I remember mother telling me why girls loved pink, why beer was a man's thing, and how women that drank it grew beards, how courtesy to greet was a sign of good upbringing. I grew up the night the landlord came knocking on the door for rent 2 weeks ago in the aftermath of a disappearing father. Something left me too. The need to fit myself into mother's old clothes, leaving my footprints within hers. To part my hair the way she did, so strangers looked at me and smiled down at my mother instead. I have learned to fight things differently. A haircut inspired by a magazine father left behind. Clothes cut into new unrecognizable styles by rusted scissors from stranger years. In the mirror, the image that stares back at me is a woman I met only 3 years ago, whose new name is called everywhere she goes and asked for when strangers swear they have met a version of her before, only calmer. only humble, only fits in herself in smaller rooms.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Aincre?
Yeah, my opinion on change. I think the idea that change is a requirement for growth, it's really condensed, right? As people, we tend to want to simplify things, but in reality, it's really nuanced. Change can be heartbreaking. That doesn't mean, I think when we say growth, we attach a positive connotation to
Yeah.
it, right? That doesn't mean that that growth is necessarily positive. I've had a lot of change in my life. I grew up in between 3 different continents by the time I was 18, from Ghana to the Netherlands to Vietnam, where I did my high school. So I've been in a lot of situations where change has been thrust upon me. And it doesn't always have the same result. Of course, you will learn new things in different environments. There's the idea that you can take yourself with you. And if you take yourself with you, you understand that you don't need material, external factors to flourish.
Yeah.
That's positive. But change can be sudden for people. It can be disruptive. It can be negative. Trees stay still their whole life and grow, right? So you don't have to necessarily be in discomfort or be in a constant state of change in order to excel or to grow. And I also think that people use change as necessary for growth as a coping mechanism that has negative effects, right? Chasing something that's always different, never staying still, never kind of confronting what's there in front of you. So I think the poem that I'm going to read is from an experience that I had with my brother when we were living in the Netherlands. I was quite young, but I think it was one of those experiences where change was not a positive thing. It was definitely forced down my throat, kind of a situation. And I think it's important to talk about change in that way too. So, let me just find. It's called Behind Wooden Railings. My brother's eyes do not leave me. They teeth with injustice and scorn, anger that comes from immobility, stolen agency. I sit upstairs, hands curled around wooden wailings that I trust will protect my senses from the scene. But his gaze streams through as sunlight might at Hamilton back home, as sunlight might back home. Beside him, 2 policemen, tall, white, armed, apologetic. They tell my mother there was a mistake. They had been looking for a black man, but had mistaken this black boy for someone else, for some other mother's black boy. He turned away from me then, his eyes ripped from mine. And in the rupture, my world curled into a scream. I had seen something too intimate, far too sharp for our bond, far too heavy for still soft hands. In his face, there was humiliation and pain, more than I'd ever thought to see, more than I was supposed to. In the moment his eyes turned from me, something between us shifted, much like my hands did on those railings. I've never forgiven myself for curling up behind them, and I believe neither of us have loved our eyes quite the same since.
It is. I remember reading this earlier today, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it because it was like a lot of emotions at the same time. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. Yeah. The idea of change as something that is controllable or uncontrollable. What do you think about it?
This is this is very personal for me.
Yeah.
Because I am someone who for many years, I have tried to control the way my life should go, right? And I have thought I have made decisions that are better off. And maybe they were, but for the past few weeks, I have been questioning a lot of decisions that I have made that maybe drove some people away who only wanted to show care,
Okay.
and maybe made some people confused as to how to approach me. And also, maybe it didn't allow me to see certain people that I grew up with in the way that a human being should be seen before being father, before being mother. We are all humans. We are all flawed. We all have our great sides. And so for the past few weeks, like I said, it's really been mind blowing how I have tried to let go and just allow things to happen, because some things are inevitable. You cannot run away from them. And in trying to control, it's only trying to avoid certain things. And the faster you confront them, the better. It may not be easy, and it may bring a lot of pain and a lot of shedding. But I think that the more we try to avoid things, the worse we become, and the worst versions of ourselves we offer people that we love. So change is good.
Okay.
It can be hard,
Mhm.
it can be terrifying,
Yeah.
but change is important.
Should we control it?
And we, as human beings, it would, we want to control things to make ourselves feel like we know what we are doing.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we should even answer should we. We will, whether we say we wouldn't or not, we will control things.
Okay.
But I think that it's important to remind yourself that you're a human being. And so you may have your plan, but life is going to bring its own thing to you. And you should be able to navigate through it. So it's okay to say, I'm going to go to school and become a writer, right? You probably will be able to do that. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be hungry because
yes.
writing in Ghana is
Yes.
hard. So how are you going to navigate these two things? It can be as simple as that to as complex as deciding not to engage in certain things, only to find yourself doing those things to survive. So we really need to remind ourselves that we are humans and the balance is important.
Thank you very much, Lizette. Okay.
So I'm someone who had like a 20-year plan when I was 12. So I really like control. I like having control over my life. I like feeling like I have a plan, even if it is 10, 20, 30 years. But I've really had to let that go for reasons like Liz
Cool.
has said.
I was going to recommend Ghana to see you so that, but you let it go. So now.
No, I let it. I've had to let it go because I think that it just means you're uncomfortable with uncertainty. You need a balance, right? Don't live your life with, don't raw dog life. Like, don't go out and live without any kind of intentionality, because intentionality is also really important. Change is all around us, but you should be able to, I think, have a sense of the direction you want to go in. I think that's also very empowering.
Yeah.
But it's all about keeping that balance. How is your relationship with change and why is it that way? I think that's a question everyone just needs to ask themselves. If your relationship with change is that it makes you uncomfortable, that's fine, but why? And if that why is kind of rooted in trauma, for me, for example, having to be hyper independent for a lot of my life means that I cling on to control because then I get to maintain that, and uncertainty doesn't swoop in and knock me off my feet. But because I know that's the why, I can address that in therapy.
Okay.
Sorry, no, but those are important questions. Understanding why you do things, why you react to change in the way that you do. I think that's where you start to chart your own path.
Okay. So we can add a poem to that, and then we go back to Elizabeth.
Sure. This poem is called Soft Rejections. You are strong, my mother tells me, her lips pressed to my temple, her knuckles are bruised, knotted in scars. I hear the sides of her ankles swell beneath us. You are strong, my friends tell me, rehearsing the words poured over them, with tongues still unconvinced. You are strong, I repeat to myself, but the words are far too heavy for my starving soul. It spits them back out at me with bile.
Thank you.
That was good.
Elizabeth.
Yeah. This is All Must Be Well, and it it was inspired by. I have a very prayerful mom who I'm grateful for,
Okay.
but doesn't mean that I don't have my issues with her. Um, Sometimes in trying to reach out for a mother, I get the response, all will be well, all must be well. And then it feels like the one person you know you can talk to is not hearing. And so who else will hear? Do you go on your knees to pray to this God? Or do you just internalize it and try to figure it out on your own? And then a few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a woman friend of mine. I'm trying not to call my friends girls because we are gradually
Yeah.
reaching the sweet mommy phase, but yeah. We were talking about our mothers, and she was telling me about how she wishes she had a mother who would talk to her more. And I had a mother who told me almost everything about her life at the time I was 13. And so just putting these two experiences together, having a communicating mother, but yet at the moment that I need her to listen, she calls on to God. Is it out of helplessness? Is it out of, seeing her daughter as this perfect being who there's nothing else to say to someone who is perfect? Yeah, so that is what inspired this one. All must be well. Some few thousand miles away, my mother clasps her hands on bended knees, praying to God to watch over her daughter. All must be well. She mouths it a million times so that here in my bed, as I lay in the dark life, slipping slowly away, I can hear her voice in the distance as if she was in the other room. All must be well. All must be well. All must be well. There are things ingrained in my mother's head that I have since stopped trying to remove, only because they make me feel less of a stranger to my own self. All must be well. A year ago, I tried to make myself human before you, my God, my mother. I tried to make you see that somehow, while becoming a woman, I became a total stranger to myself, lost and not knowing where to look. All must be well. A few months ago, I called on you, my God, my mother. I was in pain, lying in a pool of my own blood, the end of breath that was forming in me. You thought my tears laughter and said, all is well. A few days ago, I traveled home to confess, but you smiled at me when I said I do not know what love feels like. I may not know who I am. I may need you to be my mother. All must be well, you said, clasping my hands in yours, singing my praises, even in silence, your eyes dancing and glistening with pride. Mother, tonight when you pray, I hope your God answers you, reminding you that all will be well. Life slips away into the dark of the night, and I have never felt more self-aware. All is well, I say. All is well. All is well. All is well.
I think that's also a thing about most of our mothers that I don't know, It could be that sometimes they are as selfless as we are, or sometimes they trust us that we can figure it out.
I mean, that's interesting because um, they were once like us, right? And they did not figure it out.
Didn't they?
I don't think so. Do we ever figure it out? We just hold on to the decisions we make and stand by them and keep moving.
And so maybe that's figuring it out.
Well, in a way, but then it's also important to admit that we don't know what we
don't
are
know.
doing. And I think parents, not just mothers,
Yeah.
actually, especially fathers, like to put up this very perfect, look and image. And it really draws them away from a child. It's almost like they are looking at themselves years ago when they needed someone. It's really interesting for me, that relationship that you see yourself again, but yet it's hard to reach out and, talk to yourself, talk to your child, talk to yourself and guide them so that they realize things faster and they realize that life it's going to be hard no matter how much of control you have. And you always have to remember that you're human. I keep saying this because the more we advance in life, the more things get easier for us through technology, the more things get liberal, the more people are able to express themselves. We lose ourselves and we lose control. It's really important that you remember that you're a human being at whatever stage and age that you are, and that the people who you bring into this world are looking up to you. So the poem says, "My mother, my God." I don't know any other God than my mother. And so I would need her to. God Himself, I mean, I hope I'm not misquoting for the religious here. I mean, He put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and then they messed up, and He didn't, I mean, He got upset. I think he needed some time to figure out what to do, before He came back with being emotional and throwing them out, and then coming back to say, you would suffer in childbirth, but you will not die. So all these things show us that you are perfect, but you are not. And I think parents need to admit this early to their children because it helps them to remind themselves that they are human beings and life is not as hard as it may look.
Yeah, can I respond to that also? I think it's really interesting because oftentimes the label of father and mother clouds the individual behind that person, right? And I think for me and a lot of my woman friends growing up till now, the conversations we've had, really, we're realizing that we're able to have positive relationships with our parents when we take away the expectations of what we see kind of encapsulated in mother, father, child. Once those labels start to blur a little bit and the expectations society attaches to them, then you're able to relate a lot more to the person behind that. So like you said, being more vulnerable. I think a lot of women and men lose themselves in motherhood and fatherhood because it's a whole identity that they commit themselves to in their life too. And it's also, for some people, like the first time doing that, right? If your mother is your God, how do I deal with being a God? Like, I'm just Aincre, I think that must be an enormous pressure to also navigate from both sides. Yeah, it's interesting.
Let's not forget about the, sorry. Should I? Sorry. I mean, we are talking about parents being more vulnerable to their children and the expectations that children have of their parents. Let's not forget about the expectations that parents have of their children and how hypocritical we become as we grow older to our parents. So I was telling Aincre that I have a friend who knows the bad girl that she is and is very happy and confident in herself, being able to do whatever she wants to do. And her mother is, let me say, oblivious to the fact that her daughter is this way. Is it intentional? Is it not? We don't know. But then my friend would say, my mother is always saying, I should not follow these bad friends, but I am a bad friend. I am the one who gave XYZ this man who impregnated her even though he's married. I am the one doing this. I am that bad friend. Well, my mother, if she has to confront this. And when she goes home, she's being the daughter that her mother wants her to be. And when she comes back to the streets of Accra, she's the bad bitch that she wants to be. So I think we need to address how, as young adults, we become very hypocritical to our parents because we are also trying not to let them see that we are also flawed and we are not the perfect child that they think that we are.
I don't want to say it's also how they conditioned us to behave.
Yeah.
For me, when I was growing up, my mother's eyes was like 14,000 languages. If I was doing anything and then my mother passes by the look in her eyes, I would know what she's saying and I'll behave accordingly.
Yeah.
I remember when I was in level 300 and I tried to have a conversation with my mother because I had tried with my dad. It was okay. And I tried to have like a similar conversation with my mother about relationships because my mother and I became very close when I got to senior high. And at this point, we could talk about almost everything, but we never had conversations about relationships.
Mm.
And I realized that my dad, even though he was very positive about it, he was finding ways to escape the conversation. So I can call, ask, and then he'll be like, when you come home with your elder brother, we will sit down and talk. And he knew that my elder brother and I never meet at home at the same time.
Avoiding.
Good. So the conversation never happened. Then one day I tried the same thing with my mom and I asked her at that point, my brother was the same age my mom was when she had him. So I asked, you know your son is the same age you were when you had him? Like, yes. And I asked, do you know any about his relationship? Do you know about any of his relationships? If I'm not trying to put any pressure on him, but if you had him at this age, probably he may be going through a similar process. So why are you not having conversations with him? And my mom's answer was, I thought or I think if I have, you see this idea of a perfect child and parents always trying to make you be like take you out of promiscuity, you know? So it's like if I talk to you about women, if I talk to you about relationships, you may impregnate somebody.
You know, I find it very interesting what you're saying because um so my dad used to love his drinks, mixing them, making his own drinks. And he would buy the Guinness and he would say, Alice, Elizabeth, come and taste. This is very young, right? And so I knew by the time I was 15 that I like gins and I hate and I hate beer, but I like ciders.
Okay.
And I knew how I would control myself because I'd seen someone get drunk and embarrass himself. I'd seen how another man would drink and hold his fort, you know. And then there's a conversation with my mother. So this is not a conversation with my dad. This is just an exposure to a drink and how I have grown so confident in drinks, even as at now. And then there's my mom, who never said anything about menstruation. And then 4 days after my 13th birthday, I see blood. And I'm scared. I don't know what's going on. And I've learned this thing in school. So you see the way the mind is conditioned, it's to trust home first. And so everything you learn in school, we've read about menstruation, we've written exams on it, but I can't relate to it because my mother never spoke about this. And so I see blood and then she sits me down. Now, if you have a boyfriend, you know, it's very warning conversations. And this is what mothers do to daughters. But then some fathers and their sons, even if they don't have a direct conversation, the exposure is there. And it gives men a certain confidence to take risks in life, to be confident in the decisions that they want to do. So I want to do this, I'm going to do it. And it doesn't have an effect on my work. I'm going to be successful in life and I'm going to have my vices. And for girls, it's almost like if you do bad, you are bad throughout, and
Everything.
everyone can see you, and it affects everything that you do.
Yeah. There's a sense of honor that's attached to a woman's
Woman,
yeah.
actions, men's actions. There's also an honor, but it's excusable with a maleness. Like, oh, boys will be boys, so he didn't really mean to do that.
And
in
it's all
this
because of the confidence that then they
Yeah.
are given, even without communicating. You are given a certain confidence to go out and reach out and experience things, and know that the experiences you encounter have nothing to do with your career,
Yeah.
have nothing to do with relationship with friends. But for girls, it's almost like if you do something wrong, everybody is looking at you, and affects everything. It affects your career, it affects your relationships, it affects even your communication with your younger or older siblings. It just does a thing on you that you just become, you just close in. And so you are going through things and trying to figure life out on your own, or taking advice from other young girls who are also really don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So you see the dangers in not communicating and in not being, just being human to your children, especially
Yeah.
with young girls.
I think that's so true. You know, as you age, you realize that young girls, they're raised with an inherent fragility or an assumed fragility about them. Like your brothers can go and play in trees, but you like, hey, come stay inside. You know, it's true.
Yes, sure.
And so when you grow up a little bit, maybe 18, 17, and you start to experience life in the way you want to experience it, there's almost this moment with a lot of young women when they realize they're not fragile. Like, hey, I did that and I'm fine and I enjoyed it.
Exactly.
And they, like, something lights up almost. You know, it's exciting for
Yeah.
them. They're like, I'm fine.
Mhm.
I can do things like this. I can go out. I can stay out till 2 a.m. I can come back home. I'm okay. And it dawns on them that that kind of fear was conditioned by parents from a young age. Yeah, it's really true.
I agree because in my family we are three boys, and the lady comes directly after me, and I feel there is lots of pressure on her than me, or even my other brothers, because there is also, and sometimes I feel like it's also a fear on the part of our parents, and they see their girl child as feeble, so they want to protect the daughter, which eventually doesn't help the daughter, but to the parent, they are protecting the daughter. And for me, my sister is able to talk to me in some ways. So now what I try to do is when she talks to me, I try to communicate with the rest of them to make them understand what she is going through and what their expectations on her life can do to her.
Very important.
It's adultification.
Yeah.
You know, you make young girls grow up a lot faster
Yeah.
than you do young boys.
So
And then
true.
you hide it behind this silly phrase of, oh, you know, boys just mature later. No, like you created that condition for that girl to mature at the rate that you need her to be more than just a young girl, to be a mother, to be a co-parent in your household, you know, all these things. And it does, it really weighs heavy on young women.
And it also comes back to the idea of involving men in mothering, men as mothers.
Men are parents. They're not mothers.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a parental thing.
Are you trying
know?
to say, I mean, fathers are fathers and mothers are mothers,
They are mothers.
but perhaps a more centered emotional involvement is what we need fathers
But
to
that's
have.
just acting as a parent. I feel like I have a problem with men saying men should be more like mothers.
Yeah.
No, you are a parent.
Okay.
Just because you're in a household doing dishes, like, look at you, you're such a good co-mom. No, you're just being a parent.
Oh, okay.
A parent is not gendered. You know, you're not overly opening up to your child and being emotional because you're leaning into a woman's side of parenting. That is just a facet of good parenting. And I think we need to actually degender the fact that we see like motherhood as this beacon of what father should be. It should just be what we see as staples of being a good parent to your child.
It is. Thank you so much for
Great.
this. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Sorry. I was going to ask you the questions. I forgot.
Yeah, so
you're moderating.
so I was about to say that I think the conversation is becoming more interesting, and we will spend like 5 hours here if we want to keep talking about this. And so we are going to invite comments from our audience. And after that, the guests will talk to us about their poetic mentors, their writing mentors, and we'll be closing from there. Yes. So if there is anybody with a question, a comment, any of them.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes. I would like to comment on the change that you guys were talking about. And I like the analogy you made with a tree being at one particular position and still growing. And I think change is often easy to accommodate when there is sufficient stability. And so a fetus which is still in the womb cannot start changing to walking when it has not been born yet.
Right.
And when it hasn't been inside the womb for the trimesters and all that. So change is often you can accommodate change unless you can't accommodate change unless you've had sufficient stability enough for you to be able to accommodate change. So I understand how she mentions change can be negative, and I'm very happy that she mentioned that we should be able to talk about change as negative, as harmful, as well as positive, and also productive. And so yeah, that's the comment I wanted to add.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other comment?
Good evening, everybody. Question, but it's about having to guide as parents, having to guide our children, and then not trying to relive our lives in them. I think there's a very thin line between that and how to manage not being remodeling your child to be what you want it to be, and then guiding. So how do we manage that to be able to, maintain the balance of, not having your child becoming your dream, but their own person?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard. I'm not a parent yet. And so my answer is from what I hope to be as a parent, because I do understand that there's one thing looking at something from the outside and there's another being in the inside, right? But I really do think that to draw that line or to not push that line too much, because no matter what, you want to see your child do good. And I think there are parents who have struggled to reach a certain comfort in life actually have a lot more expectations on their children. And so it's difficult to not want your child to end up being great, because you're not the only one looking at your child, but society is looking at how you bring up your child, and they're going to use that to mark your whole existence. So it's hard to avoid, but I think that it is easier to navigate if you reconcile with yourself that you have also made mistakes in life, and it's fine. And you didn't get everything right, but you are here, still alive. You're still making it possible. You have someone you're now guiding up. I think parents need to reconcile with themselves and their past so that it's easier to just be a parent. I think that's all I can say, because it's a whole different ballgame being a parent. So when I get there, I probably will have a better answer. So.
Yes. I mean, also, thankfully, I'm also not a parent right now. But I would agree. I think that you need to have a level of intentionality in becoming a parent, I think. Personally, for me, that's what I would like to have. I want to choose when I'm ready to have children, not just financially, but emotionally ready to perform those responsibilities. And I also think that, to be very honest, our parents were shaped by very different factors, right? So hey, your father not talking to you emotionally, but really kind of paying for your school fees, A, B, C, D. Those may be things that he didn't get. And so that's his way of showing love. I think it's a mutual relationship that has to, you both have to walk towards one another, right? It's not as if just because you're a child, there's no responsibility on you either. You have to understand that this is how I may want love, but there's also love shown in a way I may not see it,
Yeah.
and how to have an open conversation. And it's that space, that ability to have that open conversation of, hey, this is, I recognize this, but this is also what I want. That safety in approaching your parent, that is the parent's responsibility to create for your child. So I think no matter who you are, as long as you can have that space where things can be teased out slowly, you're on the right track.
I'm just going to add, because I feel like we've been centering so much on parenthood, but it's really about love in general. I think that we also need to learn how to love people differently.
Yeah.
And also I think it's really even more important to know how people receive love. So you have 3 kids, they are going to receive love differently. And you need to understand that you paying the fees of all of them doesn't mean that they would all understand that love. Maybe the first child would, the second child may not, the third child may not. But how do they receive love? And then in the understanding of receiving of love and giving it back, it boils down to friendship.
Yeah.
You know, to be in a relationship with your partner, to even your work ethics, you know, how the people receive love. Not love, not only romantic love, but then platonic love, where you are able to call someone to their book, but then not be too harsh on them, because you understand that we are humans and we take things differently. So I really think that human beings are selfish because we always want. But it's important to also learn how to give and understand how people receive love.
Okay, so Tedros, who? Oh. Okay, so yes, so there is a comment from Tedros Who and Alice Paz, and they say that you are speaking fast.
I was gonna do this because so that's what we always do.
First, I just want to comment on the enjoyed it. It's just like so many stuff. One direction. I have just to comment. I'm a mother, and the one aspect you haven't touched on is just how scary it is. Really an awesome responsibility in the scariness of the word, and I think what we don't realize is that you have children who believe you as God until they can speak. Then you discover what you've done. Yes, because when it's happening, they don't speak your God. You know, they are growing and they don't start speaking at 11 or 12, reflecting. They start reflecting. And I remember my mother becoming real to me when she started telling me. Until then, she was there. She was a mother there. I didn't, the skills didn't fall. I didn't see my mother as a woman until I was about when she was pregnant. So when I look back at my own children, I just think, carry on and carry on. And suddenly they're telling me what to do with them. And that's so the first comment is that it's frightening. The second one is, I do think that if you stop thinking about yourself, you can let your children. I was always very conscious that my children were not in a very competitive environment, but I always said to them, do the best you can do. So not ever comparing them to, if I have to different, they walk totally different paths.
Let me read it. Okay. Susu KTGR says, I'm so impressed by the lady in the orange.
That's one of my best friends, don't mind.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. So first off, incredible poetry. Thank you guys so much. What I'd like to say is sometimes we need to also look at our parents through the lens of lovers. You know what it's like when you fall in love with someone, like initially. You understand the way that you look at them, the way that you treat them is very different. And I'm saying this because I never understood why my mom would restrict me so much until she had my baby brother, and I sort of had to be mom when she wasn't around. If I don't see him for, like if I don't see him for 5 minutes, then I'm panicking. You understand? But he's a human. He can handle himself.
Yeah.
But I still panic. It's not because I'm trying to restrict him or I'm trying to put my what I wanted to be or whatever on him. But it's just love sometimes.
Yeah.
You understand? And it's just especially for women, an older woman knowing what the world has done to her. You understand? And knowing what the world could do to you is going to try to help you escape.
Right.
You understand? So it's not necessarily I want you to become what I couldn't become, but more so I want to try so that some of the things that were done to me are not done to you.
Exactly.
Yeah, and because you're young and you are seeing me as God, I can't have certain conversations with you in a way that, and then by the time that I can have, like she was saying, by the time I can have those conversations with you, there's so much that may be done.
Yeah.
And also remember, like, for me, my mom had me when she was like 20. But for most people, it's around like, let's say 28, 30. We are, most of us around that age now. What do you know?
Exactly.
Like, so you have no idea. Now, you are a person with no idea what life is even about, but you have your own goals. Then you have a baby. Then you have to put your goals aside and be a god to this person.
No, no one is putting their life aside.
Huh? Yeah, because if
Not
you
do
don't
that.
put your life aside, then you become the absent mom. My mom was never there.
Oh, so are you saying that to be a good mother, sacrifice is absolutely necessary?
I think you can't
Definitely.
avoid sacrifice.
You
But I
can't.
think that we are privileged, at least for this times that we find ourselves to navigate and plan how much you can sacrifice. So we can't, at least I think that sacrifice is a human, it comes to us by default.
Right.
And so, but it doesn't mean that you're going to put a whole career and
I think sacrifice is sacrifice when you don't expect it and you don't want to sacrifice for it. I feel like there's similar to the gentleman at the back. My little sister's a lot younger than me. You know, she's 14, and there's nothing I wouldn't give up for her. That's not a sacrifice for me. That's just how I view our relationship.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's love. So I feel like we do tell women though that be prepared for the sacrificial relationship that you're going to, the sacrificial stage of your life that's coming. You know, like motherhood comes and there's a fear attached to it because, sorry? Oh, sorry. But I was saying that what we haven't talked about just yet is the end part of that cycle where I may become a mother, my mom's a mother, and empathy starts to sprout back again. I'm sorry, I didn't know that it was like this. I was so hard on you. I don't know how to do this myself. You know, that's a whole different part of that relationship that I think, you know, obviously we haven't reached yet with our parents. A lot of us haven't reached yet with our parents. But I think that's also a very beautiful stage because understanding comes from that. I'm stepping into your shoes and I'm also finding it hard. And you start to soften, memories start to soften in your mind.
Okay.
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Man, I love how you just broke down sacrifice. So cool.
Also, we have to consider that the world is changing at such a fast rate that maybe the way she raised you was totally perfect for the world that she was in. That if you had met that world, you would appreciate her even more. But she couldn't gauge just how much the world would change. And so maybe some of the lessons that she tried to teach you now, you look at it as you messed up my life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
For me, it's just a comment, thinking, in some ways, especially with people on certain westernized ways of family and so on and so forth, everything is individualized. And so what's missing in some ways is the community role, however
So true.
big of all the community is. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, my grandmother's house where there were many different people in the house, not just women, who would have eyes on the child, who wanted to change and
Yeah.
change it. So I know one who wrote the book that looked at middle class and family and saw how autonomy was being lost as a consequence of moving into this more individualized nuclear family. So the burden out on even one of them actually thought what maybe in a particular way. And then when they're also then moving far from family as well. So, I know my mother has come and help support in the process. But now I think even some young generations wouldn't even tolerate that. They don't want anybody in their house, so they find it actually that people live in their house. And the government system is not creating the structure. So I guess for me, the big thing is, yes, it's good to take on the burden, but I think it's good for
Yeah, I think the community never went away. I mean, I do understand that life has changed, families move away and all that. Community is still there, and we learn it even when you are going through a tough time, and you can call a friend who can just maybe hear you cry on the phone, and it's okay. Or this adults who, if you talk to, they're going to know what they just know how to get you out of a certain mood.
Yeah.
I think it's the same way. We just need to reach out for the community. Maybe back then it was so available because we were together and we had more time. But I think now you should remember that you're not in this world alone. Even if you may feel alone, you have friends, you have people. I mean, there are people on your phone that you know that if I need something, I could call this person. We need to try to learn how to reach out for help when we need it. I always tell my mom that the way you are such a good mother, I'm going to be a great mother, but when I have my child, you're going to live with me because I need you. I'm going to be working. I'm still going. This is what life is for us now. I'm going to have a child, and then probably in 2 months, I have to go back to work.
Yeah.
And I'd love to plan my life in such that the first 5 years of my children's life, I will be there. But increasingly, it is becoming impossible because of the kind of work that we find ourselves in, the demand of society from working people. And so remind your mother that you have another child to raise. We have a child to raise together. Remind your friend that when they have a child and they need something, I'm not a mother yet, but I could help one way or the other. If you need some rest, I can come over.
Yeah.
You sleep and I watch the child. Just that 1 hour of sleep can do so much for you. So
Yeah.
community is there. We just need to reach out for it.
It's interesting. I think I really disagree. Of course, my mother is my mom and she loves me, but I also don't want my mom to be raising kids her entire life. Let me tell you, if I have my child, of course, there'll be that connection. But I can't ask my mom to raise another kid. Do you get what I mean? I think you're right. The configurations of family are changing drastically. People have different ideals. I mean, me, I don't know if I could live with my cousins and my mom and my brothers next door. No, because I control. I do want to control somewhat the ideals my children are exposed to. Though that's really important for me, you know? And in that way you tend to nuclearize your bubble just a little bit so you can control, like, hey, I don't want my kid crying and you telling him that he's not a man. Like, that doesn't fly with me, you know? Like, I want to keep that within the home and as much as possible regulated. I think that it's really like the lady at the back said, it's really the institutional support that has to carry the different configurations of family. You're going to have single moms, you're going to have widows, you're going to have single fathers, you're going to have polygamous relationships, you're going to have, you know, dual parent, single parent households. And all of these configurations will need that same kind of availability, or at least access to institutional support. We can rely on community, but I know my friends and we're in different stages of life. I have a friend who's married and has a child. I have a friend who is this close away from getting like a hysterectomy, doesn't want children at all. She's sure about it. We're in very different stages. And for that friend who doesn't want a kid, I'm not going to come and give her my kid to come and babysit. I don't think she'll do it. So we have connections that are forming, but I think it is still very different from how it used to be in the past.
Or maybe it isn't. Maybe we are just adults now and we're experiencing life. It's different.
I think it was very different.
That evangelical Christianity plays, because it emphasizes the nuclear family and it brings this idea of the extended family being full of witches and whatever. I mean, I'm very Christian. I pray a lot. So this is not because I'm not Christian, but I think you need, like you were saying, you need to see things for what they are. And we need to see some of the institutions that are growing in our society for what they are. They're a force for good, but they also have a dark side. And for me, the dark side of the evangelical Christianity churches is that they have slowly broken down a very rich fabric that we have of the extended family and how we live with them. So, yeah.
Recently,
Go ahead. Sorry.
recently I went to a funeral at my father for my aunt, my patrilineal aunt, and they hadn't seen me in like 22 years, and so they all recognized me. Yes, but I didn't know anybody. So that's an example of how very different it has become now. I know my mother's family because I can't say matrilineal, but only a handful, the ones that I lived with. But the other ones who are like, say, the cousins who twice removed and others, I don't know them. And many of them know me for some reason, but then I go there and they mention my name, and I'm like, yeah. You know, like, oh, when we're like kids, we used to play on, like, I don't remember any of you. And so the community might be there, but if you don't have access to them by knowing them best, you can't reach them. So maybe, yeah, of course, we still have our family, the family tree still exists, but me that I'm very, very uprooted in my own family, how much more in the actual community where I don't have family connections and I've lived my life mostly with a few friends that I break up. I stop becoming friends with because I keep shifting and all those things. So my fault, my great. And so the community, in the case of people who are very, very great access to them because it's a social thing, not a present.
Yeah, I see and acknowledge every I don't think it's just expectation on family. There are siblings who can't stand each other. I grew up in the same house. I feel like because of the time we spend in the home, there's this idea that they are the ones you go to when you need something. But sometimes the longer you spend with your mother, the more you can't stand her. And it's fine. The more you spend time with your sister or your brother, the more you realize that I can't rely on this guy, I can't rely on this girl. Outside of the family, you do establish relationships with people who are going to be there for just one experience to help you through. And it's important that we acknowledge these relationships as well. It's as simple as going to the supermarket and realizing that you left your purse and the stranger says, "Oh, I like your hair," you know, and then they come to the counter and you don't have your purse. So don't worry, I'll pay for you. And it's as complex as having a friend in school who would be the one to guide you through a very tough time that none of the family members will know about.
Yeah.
So as much as family, a system out of the family that sometimes is more resilient, more strong than the family bonds that we create.
I get you, but I think it's not contradictory what you're saying. Like, you mentioned that you can grow up in a household with your siblings. Like, it's not just restricted then to that nuclear setting of mother, father, brother, sister. You have an array of people around you, and I'm sure. I mean, if you're beefing with everyone, you're also an issue. Like,
right?
At the end of the day, if it's cousins, second cousins, that is you. But I feel like that breadth is also really refreshing. I mean, I grew up in a house with my grandmother, and I think that the idea of being able to maintain an intergenerationality to that extent is super valuable for us growing up, having that dialogue, that conversation. If we're talking about institutions, I mean, look at the West and the aging societies. It's also because there's an accumulation from that separation and that unpicking of the fabric, as my mom says. So I feel that with the nuclear family, there also comes other consequences that, these are conversations that I still think we need to have.
Colonialism also focuses on nucleation. That's with
Yes.
setting up workforces and creating this perfect bungalow lifestyle for Africans to emulate. We lost ourselves before the evangelicals took root.
Well, missionaries. Well, missionaries.
That's a whole nother
It's from Daisy.
conversation.
Coming from
PhD
Daisy.
thesis, actually.
All right. I think we will just go into what inspires your creative work and the mentors. Yes,
Mentors,
because
wow.
I think the conversation is very interesting, but we need more time to have the conversation. Probably we may have to schedule another session and then come continue this conversation. Yes, part 2. So
Can I make a proposition? I'm
Okay.
sorry.
sure,
This
sure.
is-
Go for it.
Let's go.
Can we read poetry and then come
Before
back to
we-
answer? I feel like there's been
sure.
such a long gap without some
No
reading.
problem.
So I'd like you to
Hey,
read.
moderator.
I'm sorry. I
No, I
think
told her
It's
earlier
good,
that
it's
I'm
good.
coming to get school.
I need to learn to be their guest.
No, but I need to come learn. So
So what's the theme of this poem?
anything.
Anything. Okay. Let me do one that I read on the radio. This is called Daisies. It's there's a little cursing in it. This world plucks little black girls apart, like a child tears daisies from their limbs. With my sisters, we heard them. We were sat right there, 5 white boys, laughing in the way they do, laughing in the way we cannot, each making a pact to fuck a black girl by semester's end, to pry one open and to see what's inside. The words washed up in my mind as glass does in sand, and for weeks my thoughts were stranded. I suppose I should have seen it coming when years later she came to me, whispered what she had done, what she had tried to do. I tell her that this world threw her away long before she tried to leave it. She told me that the world had forced itself between her legs and pried her open.
Man, I love your poetry.
It's too.
Um, this is the museum of you and I. At my funeral, there will be no open casket. Instead, an exhibition of me titled A Portrait of an Artist Bearing It All. I died with the thoughts of the last time we held hands. You will find it is the last picture in the museum of you and I. Do you remember the touch and how we knew that things had to end even though our hearts still called each other's names? See here my confessions in the form of photos, and see there as the people wear frowns and uncertainty on their faces. Were I laid in front of them in an open casket, would their eyes not look down at me with sadness and sometimes joy? At the museum of you and I hope you remember that. I hope you remember what it means to live regardless of who is watching or not, that you take the joy that comes because pain does not negotiate its arrival, that you make memories that will last forever. Here, in other worlds, life's duty is to serve as difficulty. Don't you see that too at the museum of you and I? If the events of our years are placed before us with an audience of 10, which parts of your life would you run to? If the events of our lives are placed before us now to an audience of none, which parts of your life would you run to? At my funeral, there will be no open caskets. Instead, an exhibition of me titled The Portrait of an Artist Bearing It All. And while the people point fingers and judge and score, while eager to see more, I hope you learn to truly live for you and I.
Thank you so much. So now we talk about yes, because we will need to touch that. So I will start with Aincre. What are the which artists, writers, poets inspire your work, and which of them do you probably consider mentors or idols?
I have to name drop. Okay.
Yeah, name drop.
So I'm thinking of three. The last one's a little big, but I'll elaborate. So one of them is definitely Shire.
Oh,
I'm a huge Shire fan. I think that how she uses like vivid description, there's a discomfort you feel after reading her poetry. And I feel like that discomfort just connects you more to what she's writing. Also, you know, the relatability of being in an immigrant family, those kinds of particular struggles that come with that. I just really connect to her work. And it's also short form poetry. So if you write poetry, you know that that's a big inspiration. Secondly, I'd say Amma Saidi. I'm a big fan. I've led workshops, lectures, the whole lot on her work. I've supervised bachelor theses dedicated to her books. I'm a huge fan. And I think what I like about her work is that it's both a social commentary, but it's also deeply personal. I fall in love with her characters. I mean, I read Changes and I broke up with my boyfriend. I think it's just a very,
Okay.
I think it's
Wow.
a very, it almost raises you. Her words almost raise you. Her stories, her plays, they leave you with something. And I've taken that from the minute I read my first book of hers. And the third mentor I'd like to mention, I know we've done this theme, we've rinsed it, but family.
okay.
You know, I've been in Ghana now for about a year back here with my mom. And, you know, my grandfather, he has a collection that my mother has preserved of books, you know, sociology, literature, the same things I'm interested in. And he's made notes in all of his his pages. And when I read those books and I stop at the same page and I see that he's made a note on the same sentence I've noticed, it really does something to me. When I read my father's poetry and I read my poetry, it does something to me. There's something very special about an inherited spark, feeling like you have an inherited spark and to build up that. So I think, yeah, I will put family in a vague sense up there because it's definitely shaped me.
Yes, I mean, I'm trying to come up with nice names and everything, but um, I think life and experience really inspires my writing. At the beginning, I said that a lot of my writing, even my fiction, is centered around human experiences with each other and how much of a toll it has on us and decision making, life trajectory, and emotions. And so I'm very observant and I stare at people to a fault. So I could go somewhere and just watch people. And sometimes it's rude, but it's just who I am. I'm just observing and seeing, just asking myself, why does he pick up the cup the way he picks the cup up? Why does she smile the way she smiles? She looks like she smiles without, like she's holding back, all these things just bring different scenarios and then it inspires my poetry. I came to poetry very late and I actually didn't like poetry. So I did English at the University of Ghana and I didn't enjoy poetry classes. But it was after school that I realized that I write poetry out of trying to let go of certain things that I'm thinking about or are weighing on me. And then probably through reading a lot of the Russian literature, and how they really center on family and experiences. So for me, it was like, I read Aincre Karenina and I was blown away that, wow, this is really about family and how toxic it can be and how different things can happen in there. I was just so amazed by it. And then I started to pen down my own thoughts on family and experiences. Another writer I think that I really love is Murakami. But then there's this musician, Gregory Alan Isafo, who I post on my status a lot. I just love he's a musician, but his words read like poetry. And yeah, so I think he's a big inspiration for a lot of the new poems that I'm writing and the way that it is being written. So I think he is like my biggest inspiration when it comes to poetry.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And we will read a poem each,
Okay.
and then
Okay. Sure. Hmm. What do I read? I'm going to read it's one between Dresses That Please Home or City Life. So which one should I read? Okay. Okay, so this is City Life. And I think it really discusses how change can be bad. When you finish school, you refuse to go back home because nothing much happens in small towns and you were made for the big life. Here in the city, they outsmart you in every way. So you have crawled into your shell, going in deeper the more the days go by. When you were 12, your favorite teacher smiled at you and swore you were the one with the lit bulb on your head. But today, you wait tables in exchange for abandoned dreams and walk home out of memory because there's no light to guide your way. You have given it all up. When you finish a day's work, watching the last drunken man finally get up to leave, you wonder what brought him here to this city that calls your name and like a magnet pulls you from the small towns only to teach you a lesson, to drain you, to suck you dry, to finish you off through a college degree gathering dust, an empty pocket, a speeding car, an understaffed hospital, or the dimming of your lights because you have no energy to replace the light that once gave you hope.
Thank you so much. I'm so familiar with this poem
Yeah.
because, like, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Aincre, thank you.
So it's Accra and
Mhm.
Accra Life. Also,
And also because of the protest ontology.
yes. Ah, yeah, that's true. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. The poem I'm going to read is called What Men Have Thought to Empty. To the men with soft hands who loved me with care, with honey and compassion and fortitude. For the men who had, with all the intention some woman hoped for, emptied out a space in their lives just for me. To the men whose mother's hands I have greeted, whose sister's cheeks I have kissed, an apology. I am sorry. I did not know I could not bend into spaces that did not hold me. I promise you I have broken my bones and bled out my tears, trying to want what some woman hoped for. But I do not want to fit into spaces that men have thought to empty, even if just.
On this note, I would like to say a very big thank you to Aincre and Elizabeth for coming through this evening and for sharing yourself with us and for sharing your poetry with us. And to our audience, thank you so much for staying in the court with us.
And to our moderator, thank
Yeah.
you also.
Yeah, thank you, thank
Great
you.
Thank
job.
you. Thank
And to
you.
our audience online.
Yes, and our audience online, and our technical men, yes, and our director as well.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, bro.
Thank you.
Thank you, bro.
Okay, so fantastic. And thanks bringing us to the soft landing. Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Aincre. Really lovely. It's right on time. I think we are on the half hour exactly. So, not to repeat what has already been said. If you keep an eye on our social media, you will be aware of other events that are coming up. And as I mentioned, this should have happened at the Goethe Institute. Unfortunately, at the last minute, move over here. Subsequent programming will mainly be over there, but I think that it's a good idea to invite in this spot. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Very, very